The needle slipped through the frayed fabric of her worn skirt, each stitch precise, despite the flickering candlelight that cast dancing shadows across the cramped boarding house room where Adelaide Norton sat hunched over her work, trying to ignore the rumble of her empty stomach and the Colorado winter wind rattling the window panes. It was January of 1877, and Redding, Colorado had proven to be a harsh mistress to the 22-year-old woman who had arrived 3 months prior with nothing but a carpetbag and fading hope. The gold rush had long since passed its peak, but Adelaide had come anyway, fleeing a life that had crumbled around her in Kansas when her father's debts had consumed everything they owned. He had died that spring, leaving her with nothing but his apologies and a single silver dollar. The boarding house was cheap, which was fortunate since her wages from washing dishes at the Rocky Mountain Saloon barely covered her rent and meager meals. Tonight, she had skipped supper entirely, choosing instead to spend the evening mending every torn piece of clothing she owned. Her only good dress had ripped at the shoulder seam 2 weeks ago, and she had been rotating through the same 3 worn skirts and 2 blouses since arriving in town. The fabric was so thin now that the Colorado cold seemed to pass right through it. Adelaide held up the skirt to examine her work in the candlelight. The stitching was neat, but no amount of careful mending could hide the fact that the fabric itself was deteriorating. She needed new clothes, but fabric was expensive, and she was barely surviving as it was. With a sigh, she set the skirt aside and picked up one of her blouses, examining a tear along the sleeve. A knock at the door startled her, and she pricked her finger with the needle. She sucked at the small bead of blood that appeared while calling out, "Who is it, Mrs. Kelly, dear?" "There is a gentleman downstairs asking to speak with you." Adelaide's heart jumped into her throat. A gentleman asking for her. She had no acquaintances in town beyond the other dishwashers and the cook at the saloon. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Had someone from Kansas tracked her down? Had her father's creditors somehow found her? She rose on unsteady legs, smoothing down her patched skirt and checking that her dark blonde hair was still pinned in its simple bun. "I will be right down, Mrs. Kelly." The boarding house stairs creaked under her feet as she descended, her hand gripping the banister. The front parlor was barely warmer than her room, and she could see her breath in small puffs as she entered. The man standing near the fireplace turned at her approach, and Adelaide had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the space. His dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered his jaw. He wore buckskins and a heavy fur coat that made him look even larger, like a bear that had learned to walk upright. His hands were rough and scarred, and muscles rippled beneath his clothing as he moved. Despite his intimidating size, his eyes were a warm brown, and they studied her with an expression she could not quite read. "Miss Norton." His voice was deep, rumbling like distant thunder. "Yes, I am Adelaide Norton." She clasped her hands in front of her to keep them from trembling. "Do I know you, sir? Name's Benjamin Wade. Most folks call me Wade or Ben, depending on how well they know me." He pulled off his fur hat, revealing more of that long dark hair. "I apologize for calling so late in the evening and without proper introduction. I was hoping we might have a word." "About what matter, Mr. Wade?" Adelaide remained standing near the doorway, ready to flee if necessary. Benjamin Wade seemed to sense her wariness because he took a step back, giving her more space. "I have been staying at the Rocky Mountain Saloon for the past week, taking my meals there. I have seen you working in the kitchen." Adelaide's cheeks flushed. She knew what she must look like, hair plastered to her forehead from the steam, hands red and chapped from the harsh lye soap, dressed in her shabby clothes. "I work hard, sir. If someone has complained about my service, no, nothing like that." He held up a hand to stop her. "I happened to overhear a conversation between you and the cook yesterday. You were asking if he knew where you might purchase fabric at a fair price." Adelaide's flush deepened, now from embarrassment rather than fear. She had been asking Mrs. Henderson, who sometimes helped in the kitchen, but the cook had overheard. "I apologize if I was being too forward. It will not happen again. Miss Norton, I am not here to scold you." Benjamin's expression softened. "I am a trapper by trade. I spend most of my time up in the mountains, but I come down to Redding every few months to sell my furs and stock up on supplies. I happened to be at the mercantile this afternoon when I remembered overhearing your conversation. The storekeeper had just received a shipment of fabrics, and I thought you might appreciate knowing." She stared at him, confused. "You came here to tell me about fabric at the mercantile?" "Not exactly." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable despite his size. "I took the liberty of purchasing several yards of various materials. Good sturdy cotton, some wool for warmth, and even a bit of calico. I was hoping you might accept them." Adelaide's mouth fell open. "You purchased fabric for me. But why? I do not understand." Benjamin Wade cleared his throat, his tanned face darkening slightly. "Miss Norton, I spend most of my life alone in the mountains with nothing but my traps and my thoughts for company. When I come to town, I keep my eyes and ears open and I notice things. I have seen how hard you work, and I have seen that your clothes are mended more than they are original fabric at this point. I also heard you tell Mrs. Henderson that your wages barely cover your room and board." He met her eyes directly. "I have more money than I need and no one to spend it on." It seemed a simple thing to do. Pride warred with desperate need inside Adelaide's chest. She wanted to refuse to tell this strange mountain man that she could take care of herself. But the truth was, she could not. She was barely surviving, and winter was only going to get harder. "Mr. Wade, I cannot accept such a generous gift from a stranger. It would not be proper." "Then let us not be strangers." He took a step closer, his expression earnest. "Let me speak plainly, Miss Norton. I have been watching you this past week, and I see a woman who is strong and hardworking, who does not complain even when life is clearly treating her harshly. I respect that. I also see a woman who is alone in a rough town, barely getting by. I have the means to help, and it costs me nothing to do so. Everything costs something, Mr. Wade." Adelaide kept her voice firm despite the trembling in her hands. "Fair enough." He nodded slowly. "Then consider it a trade. Accept the fabric, and in return, allow me to call on you from time to time when I am in town. I would appreciate having someone to talk to besides rough trappers and drunks in the saloon." Adelaide studied him carefully. She had learned to read men in her months of survival, and what she saw in Benjamin Wade's face was not deception or ulterior motives. She saw loneliness, the same emotion that gnawed at her own heart during the long, cold nights in her room. "Why me?" she asked softly. "There are prettier women in Redding, women with better prospects. Pretty is common as dirt, Miss Norton. Strength of character is rare as gold." His brown eyes held hers. "Besides, I find you very pretty, especially when you are concentrating on your work and you get that little crease between your eyebrows." Despite everything, Adelaide felt a small smile tug at her lips. "You are either very kind or very foolish, Mr. Wade. Probably a bit of both." He returned her smile, and it transformed his rugged face, making him look younger and less intimidating. "Will you accept my offer?" She should refuse. Every proper bone in her body told her to politely decline and send this strange mountain man on his way. But propriety was a luxury she could no longer afford, and the thought of new fabric, of warm clothes that did not have holes worn through them, was too tempting to resist. "I will accept the fabric, Mr. Wade, with gratitude. And you may call on me when you are in town, provided we meet in public spaces to preserve my reputation." "Of course." He looked genuinely pleased, his smile widening. "The fabric is on my horse outside. Let me bring it in." He disappeared out the front door, letting in a blast of cold air that made Adelaide shiver. Mrs. Kelly appeared from the kitchen, her round face bright with curiosity. "Well, Adelaide, that is quite the gentleman caller. Benjamin Wade is well known in these parts. They say he is the best trapper in Colorado, and the richest one too. Every unmarried woman in town has tried to catch his eye, but he keeps to himself." Adelaide barely had time to process this information before Benjamin returned, his arms loaded with wrapped parcels. He set them on the small table in the parlor, and when he unwrapped them, Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. There were yards and yards of fabric in various colors and materials. Sturdy brown cotton for everyday wear, thick gray wool for warmth, and even a beautiful calico print in shades of blue and cream that would make a lovely dress for church. It was more fabric than she had owned in her entire life. "Mr. Wade, this is too much." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "It is exactly enough." He gathered the parcels back up. "Show me to your room, and I will carry these up for you." "That would not be proper, sir. Then I will leave them here, and you can make multiple trips up those stairs carrying heavy fabric." He raised an eyebrow. "Or you can let me carry them up, set them inside your door, and leave immediately. Mrs. Kelly can chaperone." Mrs. Kelly was already nodding enthusiastically. "I will come right up with you both. Nothing improper will happen in my establishment." Adelaide surrendered, leading the way up the narrow stairs with Benjamin and Mrs. Kelly following. Her room looked even more shabby with Benjamin Wade standing in it, his large frame making the small space feel tiny. He set the fabric on her narrow bed, his eyes taking in the mending spread across the small table, the single guttering candle, the thin blanket on her bed. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing about what he saw. Instead, he simply tipped his hat to her. "Good night, Miss Norton. I will call on you tomorrow afternoon if that is acceptable. Perhaps you would join me for supper at the hotel restaurant. I work until 6 at the saloon. Then I will meet you at 6:15. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Adelaide." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Yes, you do not have to live like this. There are other options." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, his heavy footsteps echoing down the stairs. "Mrs." Kelly gave Adelaide a significant look before following him, leaving Adelaide alone with her candlelight and her new fabric. She ran her hands over the materials, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. When had anyone last shown her such kindness? Her father had loved her, but he had been broken by life, unable to provide or protect. Since his death, she had been utterly alone, fighting for every scrap of survival. Adelaide did not sleep much that night. Instead, she sat up planning the garment she would make, her needle flying through fabric as she began work on a new blouse. The cotton was so much sturdier than her old things, and her stitches seemed to sing through it. By the time dawn light began creeping through her window, she had completed most of the blouse and started on a skirt. Work at the saloon dragged endlessly that day. Her hands moved through the familiar motions of scrubbing pots and washing dishes, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about Benjamin Wade, about his kind eyes and gentle voice despite his imposing size. She thought about his offer to let him call on her, and about his cryptic words regarding other options. What had he meant by that? Surely not marriage, not after one brief conversation. Men did not propose to women they had just met. not even in the rough and tumble world of the Colorado frontier. Perhaps he meant she could find better employment, though she had already tried every respectable establishment in town. The saloon was the only place willing to hire a woman with no references and no connections. At 6 o'clock, she removed her apron and washed her face and hands at the pump behind the kitchen. Her heart was beating faster than it should as she walked around to the front of the saloon. Benjamin Wade was waiting for her, leaning against a post with his arms crossed over his broad chest. He had cleaned up since the previous night, his hair pulled back and his beard neatly trimmed. He wore clean buckskins and a heavy coat that emphasized the width of his shoulders. When he saw her, he straightened and that warm smile crossed his face again. "Miss Norton, right on time. I am always punctual, Mr. Wade." She tried to sound composed despite her nervousness. "I have noticed." He offered her his arm. "Shall we?" Adelaide hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. His arm was solid as iron beneath her touch, all muscle and strength. He shortened his stride to match hers as they walked down the main street toward the hotel. The dining room was the nicest place Adelaide had been since arriving in Redding. White tablecloths covered the tables, and actual glass windows kept out the cold. Benjamin held out her chair for her before taking his own seat, and when the waiter arrived, he ordered without looking at the prices. "Bring us the roast beef with all the fixings and coffee, also a slice of apple pie for the lady." "Right away, Mr. Wade." Adelaide waited until the waiter had left before speaking. "Mr. Wade, this is too much. First the fabric and now this expensive meal. Benjamin." "Or Ben, if you prefer, and it is just supper, Adelaide. Surely you cannot object to a meal." "I object to charity." "Then consider it payment for your company." He leaned forward, his brown eyes serious. "I meant what I said last night. I spend most of my life alone. Having someone to share a meal with is worth more to me than the cost of the food." The sincerity in his voice made her relent. "Very well, Benjamin, but please do not think you need to rescue me. I have been taking care of myself for quite some time now." "I do not doubt that for a moment." He sat back as the waiter brought their coffee. "Tell me about yourself, Adelaide. How did you end up in Redding?" She wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, grateful for the heat. "There is not much to tell. My father and I lived in Kansas. He was a farmer, but he was not very good at it. He borrowed money to keep the farm going, but the crops failed more years than they succeeded. When he died last spring, the debts consumed everything. I had no family left, no prospects, so I came west hoping to make a new start." "And has Redding provided that new start?" Adelaide let out a bitter laugh. "Redding has provided me with hard work and bare survival, but I am alive, and I am free of debt, so I suppose that is something. You deserve more than bare survival. Perhaps, but we do not always get what we deserve in this life." She met his eyes over her coffee cup. "Now tell me about you. How does a man become a mountain trapper?" Benjamin's expression grew distant. "I grew up in Missouri, youngest of 5 brothers. My father had a small farm, barely enough to support us all. When I was 18, I headed west to make my own way. Started trapping in the Rockies, and I found I had a talent for it. That was 12 years ago. I have been living in the mountains ever since, coming down to civilization only a few times a year to sell furs and buy supplies." "That sounds like a lonely life." "It is." He did not try to deny it. "But it is honest work, and the mountains are beautiful. There is a peace up there that you cannot find among people. And yet here you are, seeking company." A rueful smile crossed his face. "A man can have too much peace. Too much silence. After a while, you start talking to yourself just to hear a human voice." The waiter brought their food, and Adelaide had to restrain herself from devouring it too quickly. The roast beef was tender and seasoned perfectly, nothing like the scraps and simple fare she usually ate. Benjamin ate with the appetite of a man used to physical labor, but his manners were impeccable. "Where did you learn to dine so properly?" Adelaide asked between bites. "I would think trappers spent little time at formal tables." "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper manners, no matter how rough our circumstances. She said you never knew when you might need to dine with important people." He grinned. "I have never dined with anyone important, but I am grateful for her lessons now." They talked throughout the meal, conversation flowing easily despite having just met. Benjamin asked about her life in Kansas, and she found herself telling him stories about her father, both the good memories and the difficult ones. He shared tales of life in the mountains, of encounters with bears and wolves, of the brutal winters and brief, beautiful summers. By the time the apple pie arrived, Adelaide realized she was genuinely enjoying herself for the first time in longer than she could remember. Benjamin Wade made her laugh with his dry humor, and he listened to her stories with genuine interest. He did not interrupt or talk over her, and he did not treat her like she was fragile or foolish. When the meal finally ended, Benjamin walked her back to the boarding house. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead, their breath fogged in the freezing air. "Thank you for supper," Adelaide said as they reached the boarding house steps. "It was the finest meal I have had in a very long time. The pleasure was mine." Benjamin looked down at her, his face serious in the lamplight. "Adelaide, I am going to say something, and I want you to really consider it before you refuse." Her heart began beating faster. "What is it?" "Come with me to my cabin, up in the mountains." She took a step back. "Mr. Wade, I am not that kind of woman." "No, wait." He held up his hands. "I am explaining this poorly. I am not asking you to be my mistress or anything inappropriate. I am asking you to marry me." Adelaide stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You are asking me to marry you." "We only just met yesterday." "I know how it sounds." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. "But hear me out. You are struggling to survive in this town, working yourself to exhaustion for wages that barely keep you fed and housed. I have a good cabin in the mountains, warm and secure, with plenty of food and supplies. I can provide for you, give you a safe and comfortable life. But you do not love me. You do not even know me." "I know enough." His voice was firm. "I know you are strong and hardworking. I know you do not complain even when things are hard. I know you have a quick mind and a kind heart. That is more than most people know about each other when they marry." "This is insane." Adelaide pressed her hands to her face. "People do not get married after one supper together. People on the frontier marry for practical reasons all the time. I need a wife, someone to share my life with. You need security and someone to take care of you. It makes sense. Marriage is supposed to be about love, not practicality." Benjamin stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Maybe love comes later. Maybe it grows from respect and companionship. My parents barely knew each other when they married, but they built a good life together." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I am not asking you to love me, Adelaide. I am asking you to give yourself a chance at something better than this." His hand was warm around hers, rough with calluses but gentle. Adelaide's mind whirled with conflicting thoughts. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity of his proposal. But another part, the practical part that had kept her alive this long, was seriously considering it. What did she have in Redding? A cramped room, hard labor, constant hunger and cold. What was her future here? More of the same, until she either found a husband or worked herself into an early grave. Benjamin was offering her comfort, security, a home, but marriage was forever. Could she really bind herself to a man she barely knew? "I need time to think about this," she finally said. This is not a decision to be made lightly. Of course. Benjamin released her hand, though he looked disappointed. I will be in town for another week. Think it over and let me know your answer. But Adelaide, he waited until she met his eyes. Do not let fear of the unknown keep you trapped in a situation that is slowly killing you. She watched him walk away, his large frame disappearing into the darkness. Her hand still tingled where he had held it. That night, lying in her narrow bed under her thin blanket, Adelaide thought about Benjamin's proposal. It was mad, completely insane. She should refuse immediately. And yet she found herself unable to dismiss it out of hand. What was love anyway? Her parents had loved each other, but that love had not saved her father from his demons or her mother from dying young of fever. Love did not put food on the table or keep the cold at bay. Maybe Benjamin was right. Maybe respect and companionship were better foundations for a marriage than romantic notions. She thought about his cabin in the mountains. She had never seen it, but she imagined it would be warm and sturdy, built by a man who knew how to survive in harsh conditions. She thought about having enough food to eat, proper clothes to wear, not having to scrub pots until her hands bled. But she also thought about being isolated in the mountains with a man who was essentially a stranger. What if he was cruel once they were alone? What if he expected things from her that she could not give? What if she was trading one form of survival for another, potentially worse situation? Adelaide spent the next several days wrestling with the decision. Benjamin called on her every evening, taking her to supper or for walks around town. He was always a perfect gentleman, never pushing her for an answer or trying to take liberties. They talked for hours, and she found herself looking forward to seeing him each day. She learned that he was thoughtful and intelligent, with a deep appreciation for the natural world. He told her about the wildlife he encountered, describing the beauty of a sunrise over the mountain peaks with the passion of a poet. He had taught himself to read using an old Bible his mother had given him, and he had a small collection of books in his cabin that he read and reread during the long winter months. He also had a protective streak that both comforted and concerned her. When a drunk stumbled too close to her on the street, Benjamin had positioned himself between them with a swift, unconscious movement. When the wind picked up during one of their walks, he had immediately shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, ignoring her protests. "You need it more than I do," he had said firmly. "I am used to the cold." On the fifth evening of his courtship, if it could be called that, they sat in the hotel dining room over coffee. Benjamin had been quieter than usual, and Adelaide could sense he was working up to something. "I need to head back to the mountains soon," he finally said. "My traps need tending, and I am running low on meat. I was hoping you would have an answer for me before I leave." Adelaide set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. She had made her decision, but speaking it aloud still terrified her. "If I agree to marry you, I have conditions." Benjamin straightened, hope flashing across his face. "Name them." "I want a real marriage, not just a business arrangement. I want us to try to build something genuine together, even if it starts from a practical foundation. I want that too. I want to be treated as a partner, not as property. My opinions and thoughts should matter. They will. I give you my word." Adelaide took a deep breath. "And if after a year we find we cannot make it work, I want your promise that you will bring me back to town and provide me with enough money to start fresh somewhere else." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. "I can agree to that, though I hope it does not come to it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But Adelaide, I want a condition of my own." "What is it?" "Promise me you will give us a real chance. Do not hold yourself back waiting for things to fail. If we are going to do this, let us do it properly." She looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, rough and scarred from years of hard living. Then she looked up at his face, at the hope and sincerity in his brown eyes. "I promise," she whispered. "When do you want to get married?" "Tomorrow, if you are willing." "The circuit judge is in town this week. We can have the ceremony at the church, small and simple." Everything was moving so fast it made her head spin, but Adelaide nodded. "Tomorrow, then." Benjamin's smile was brilliant, transforming his rugged face. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You will not regret this, Adelaide. I swear it." The next 24 hours passed in a blur. Adelaide gave notice at the saloon, packed her meager belongings, and used a tiny bit of her savings to pay Mrs. Kelly for 2 extra nights that she would not be using. Mrs. Kelly had been thrilled by the news of the impending marriage, declaring it the most romantic thing she had heard in years. "Benjamin Wade is a good man," the boarding house keeper had said while helping Adelaide pack. "Quiet and keeps to himself, but he has always been fair in his dealings. You could do much worse, dear." Adelaide wore her best dress, the one she had mended so carefully, to the wedding. It was nothing fancy, but she had pressed it as smoothly as possible and pinned her hair up with extra care. Benjamin met her at the small church wearing clean clothes, his hair and beard freshly trimmed. He looked nervous, which somehow made Adelaide feel better about her own nerves. The ceremony was brief, performed by the traveling judge with only Mrs. Kelly and the hotel owner as witnesses. Adelaide's hands shook as Benjamin slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. His hands were steady, though, his voice firm as he spoke his vows. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed her for the first time. It was chaste and brief, but Adelaide felt warmth spread through her chest at the gentleness of it. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, in the nicest room available. Benjamin had been careful to give her space, letting her change into her nightgown behind a privacy screen. When she emerged, he was sitting in a chair by the window, still fully dressed. "I know this is all happening very fast," he said quietly. "I do not expect anything from you tonight. We can take our time getting to know each other properly." Relief and something else, perhaps disappointment, flooded through Adelaide. "Thank you for understanding. Get some rest. We have a long journey ahead of us tomorrow." He slept in the chair that night, insisting the bed was hers. Adelaide lay awake for hours, hyper-aware of his presence in the room, wondering what she had just committed herself to. They left Reading at dawn, Benjamin's horses loaded with supplies. He had 2 riding horses and a sturdy pack horse carrying everything they would need. Adelaide had never been much of a rider, but Benjamin had purchased a gentle mare for her. "Her name is Clover," he said as he helped Adelaide into the saddle. "She is calm and sure-footed. Just relax and let her follow my horse. She knows the way." The journey into the mountains took 3 days. They traveled during daylight hours and camped at night, Benjamin setting up a small tent for Adelaide while he slept by the fire. He was attentive to her comfort, making sure she had enough blankets, cooking simple but filling meals over the campfire. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape became more dramatic. Snow-capped peaks rose around them, pine forests stretched as far as the eye could see, and the air grew thinner and clearer. Despite the cold and the difficult traveling, Adelaide found herself captivated by the beauty of it all. "It is magnificent," she breathed as they paused on a ridge overlooking a vast valley. Benjamin smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Wait until you see it in spring when the wildflowers bloom. The whole valley turns into a carpet of colors." On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they arrived at Benjamin's cabin. It was larger than Adelaide had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a stream running nearby. There was a barn for the horses and a sturdy root cellar built into the hillside. "Welcome home," Benjamin said, dismounting and coming to help her down from Clover. Adelaide's legs were shaky from 3 days of riding, and she stumbled as her feet hit the ground. Benjamin caught her easily, his strong arms steadying her. "Easy now. You will be sore for a day or two until you get used to riding." He showed her around the property, pointing out where he stored firewood, where the privy was located, the cold room where he kept meat frozen during winter. Then he led her inside the cabin. The interior was neat and surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor trapper's dwelling. There was a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy wooden table with chairs, shelves filled with supplies and books, and a large bed covered with thick furs in one corner. The walls were solid, and though the space was simple, it was clearly well maintained. "It is not fancy," Benjamin said, watching her take it all in, "but it is warm and dry, and I have always kept it clean." "It is wonderful," Adelaide said honestly. Compared to her boarding house room, this cabin was a palace. Benjamin looked relieved. "I will bring in our supplies and get a fire going. You must be exhausted from the journey. Why do not you rest while I take care of the horses?" Over the next few weeks, Adelaide settled into her new life. Benjamin had been right about her being sore from riding. She could barely move for 2 days after their arrival. He had been patient and kind, taking over all the work while she recovered. As she healed, Adelaide began taking on the household tasks. She cooked their meals, cleaned the cabin, and started organizing Benjamin's supplies in a more efficient manner. She also began sewing in earnest, using the fabric he had bought her to make proper clothes for both of them. Benjamin's shirts were worn and patched, and she took pleasure in creating new ones that actually fit his large frame properly. Benjamin spent his days checking his trap lines, hunting, and maintaining the property. He always made sure to be back at the cabin before dark, and he never went more than a day without returning. Adelaide appreciated that he did not leave her alone for long periods, knowing she was still adjusting to this isolated life. They were careful with each other, polite and respectful, but maintaining a certain distance. Benjamin continued to sleep on the floor near the fireplace, insisting Adelaide take the bed. They talked during meals, sharing stories and slowly learning more about each other. But there was an awkwardness between them, a awareness that they were married but still strangers in many ways. One evening about a month after their arrival at the cabin, Adelaide was mending one of Benjamin's fur coats by lamplight while he sat at the table cleaning his rifle. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, how comfortable it had all become. "Benjamin," she said softly. "Yes." He looked up from his work. "Thank you for bringing me here, for giving me this chance." He set down the rifle and came to sit near her. "You do not have to thank me, Adelaide. This benefits both of us." He hesitated, then continued, "Are you happy here?" "I know it is isolated and different from town life." Adelaide considered the question carefully. "I am content. The work is hard, but no harder than washing dishes 12 hours a day. And here I have enough food, warm clothes, and a solid roof over my head. That is more than I had before." "Content is not the same as happy." "Perhaps not, but it is a good start." She set down her mending. "Are you happy?" "More than I have been in years." Benjamin's voice was quiet but sincere. "Having someone to come home to, someone to talk to, it makes a difference. The cabin feels like a home now instead of just a shelter." They looked at each other in the lamplight, and Adelaide felt something shift between them. Benjamin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle despite his rough hands. "I know we married for practical reasons," he said, "but I want you to know I am glad it was you. I think we can build something good here if we both try." "I think so too," Adelaide whispered. That night, when it came time for bed, Adelaide made a decision. "Benjamin, this is foolish. We are married. You should not be sleeping on the floor." He looked uncertain. "Adelaide, I do not want to rush you into anything you are not ready for. I am not suggesting anything beyond sharing the bed." Her cheeks flushed, but she forced herself to continue. "But you are my husband, and it is cold, and that bed is large enough for both of us. We can keep our night clothes on and maintain a respectful distance." Benjamin agreed, though he looked nervous as they both prepared for bed. Adelaide changed behind a blanket hung up for privacy, and when she emerged in her long nightgown, Benjamin was already under the furs on the far side of the bed, wearing a long nightshirt. She climbed in on her side, hyper-aware of his presence just feet away. The bed was indeed large enough that they were not touching, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Good night, Adelaide," Benjamin said into the darkness. "Good night, Benjamin." It took her a long time to fall asleep, but when she did, she slept better than she had in weeks. Winter in the mountains was harsh but beautiful. Snow fell frequently, piling up around the cabin in deep drifts. Benjamin taught Adelaide how to use snowshoes, and they would sometimes take walks together through the winter landscape. He showed her his trap lines, teaching her about the different animals and how to read tracks in the snow. Adelaide discovered that she had a knack for shooting, much to Benjamin's surprise. He had been teaching her how to use a rifle, insisting she needed to know how to protect herself if he was ever injured or unable to make it back to the cabin. She had a steady hand and good aim, and soon she was accompanying him on hunting trips. "You are full of surprises, Mrs. Wade," he had said with a grin after she brought down a rabbit with a single clean shot. Hearing him call her Mrs. Wade sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped thinking of herself as Adelaide Norton playing at being married and started thinking of herself as Adelaide Wade, with all that implied. As the weeks turned into months, the careful distance between them began to shrink. They stood closer together while cooking. Their hands would brush during meals, and neither would pull away. Benjamin would sometimes put his arm around her shoulders when they sat together in the evening, and Adelaide would lean into his warmth. The bed sharing had become comfortable and natural. Some mornings, Adelaide would wake to find she had migrated toward the middle of the bed during the night, sometimes with her head on Benjamin's shoulder or his arm draped over her waist. He was always warm, and she found herself sleeping better than she ever had before. One night in late February, a fierce blizzard hit. The wind howled around the cabin and snow piled up against the walls. The temperature inside dropped despite the roaring fire in the fireplace. Adelaide and Benjamin huddled together under every fur and blanket they owned. "This is a bad one," Benjamin said, his breath fogging in the cold cabin air. "Could last a few days." Adelaide pressed closer to him, seeking his warmth. "Will we be all right? We have plenty of wood and food. We will be fine as long as we stay inside and keep warm." He pulled her more firmly against his chest, rubbing her arms to generate heat. "Are you scared?" "A little," she admitted. "I have never experienced a storm like this before. I will keep you safe." His voice was firm and his arms tightened around her. "I promise, Adelaide. Nothing will happen to you while I am here." The storm raged for 3 days. Adelaide and Benjamin stayed in bed most of that time, only getting up to tend the fire and prepare simple meals. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their childhoods, dreams they had once had, fears they rarely voiced. The enforced intimacy of the storm broke down the remaining walls between them. On the third night, as the wind finally began to die down, Adelaide found herself studying Benjamin's face in the firelight. His beard had grown longer over the winter, and his hair now brushed his shoulders. The hard planes of his face had become familiar to her, dear even. Without thinking, she reached up and traced the line of his jaw. Benjamin's breath caught. "Adelaide, I think I am falling in love with you," she whispered, surprised by her own admission. "I did not expect it to happen, but it has." His brown eyes searched hers, and what she saw there made her heart race. "I have been in love with you since that first night in the boarding house, when you stood there looking frightened but defiant, determined not to accept help even though you were clearly struggling. You were so brave, so strong. I knew then that I wanted you in my life. Why did you not tell me? Because you needed time. You needed to know this was your choice, not something I had forced on you." He cupped her face with one large hand. "I want you to want me, Adelaide. Not because I provide for you, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you truly want me." "I want you," she said firmly. "I want this marriage to be real in every way." Benjamin kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly. It was nothing like their chaste wedding kiss. This was passion and promise, and Adelaide responded with equal fervor. His hands tangled in her hair, and she gripped his broad shoulders, feeling the muscles beneath the fabric of his nightshirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." That night, their marriage became real in truth. Benjamin was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Adelaide felt comfortable and cared for. Afterward, as they lay tangled together under the firs, Adelaide felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Benjamin immediately asked, concern in his voice. "No." She laughed and cried at the same time. "I am just happy, genuinely happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way after my father died. I thought survival was the best I could hope for." Benjamin kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You deserve so much more than survival. You deserve joy and love and all the good things life can offer. And I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to give them to you." "I love you," she said again, marveling at how easily the words came now. "I love you too, my beautiful wife." The rest of the winter passed in a haze of contentment. Benjamin still worked his trap lines, but he hurried back to the cabin each evening, eager to be with Adelaide. She continued her sewing and household tasks, but she also started reading the books from his collection, and they would discuss them in the evenings. They made plans for the spring, talking about planting a garden and maybe getting some chickens. When spring finally arrived in April, melting the snow and coaxing the first wildflowers from the ground, Adelaide walked out one morning to find the valley transformed. Colors burst from every corner, exactly as Benjamin had promised. She stood in the meadow near the cabin, turning in slow circles to take it all in. Benjamin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "What do you think?" "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "The second most beautiful," he corrected, turning her to face him. "You are the first." She smiled up at him, this man who had bought her fabric and asked her to stay, who had given her not just security but love. "You know what I realized yesterday?" "What?" "It has been more than a year since you proposed. I suppose the terms of our agreement have expired." Benjamin stiffened slightly. "So they have. Do you want to revisit those terms?" Adelaide pretended to consider. "Well, you did promise that if things did not work out, you would take me back to town and give me money to start fresh somewhere else." "I did promise that." His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the hurt in his eyes. She reached up and pulled his head down to hers. "Good thing I have no intention of leaving then. You are stuck with me, Benjamin Wade." The relief and joy on his face was worth the momentary teasing. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "I would have kept my promise," he said when he set her down. But I am very glad I do not have to. I cannot imagine my life without you now." "You will never have to," she promised. That summer they planted their garden, working side by side in the rich mountain soil. Benjamin built a chicken coop, and they acquired 6 hens from a trading post 2 days' ride away. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm of work and companionship. In August, Adelaide realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain before telling Benjamin. "I think I am with child," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Benjamin went very still. "Truly, truly." He let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens and probably every animal within a mile. He picked Adelaide up, much more carefully than he had in the spring, and kissed her soundly. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "You are going to be a mother and I am going to be a father." "Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not begin to cover it. He set her down gently, his large hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "Though I will admit I am nervous too. The nearest doctor is in Reading, 3 days away. Women have been having babies without doctors for thousands of years, Benjamin. We will manage." But as her pregnancy progressed, Benjamin became increasingly protective. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, barely letting Adelaide lift anything. When winter came again, he refused to let her go out in the cold, worried she would slip on ice. He made multiple trips to Reading to stock up on supplies, determined that they have everything they might need. In February, as another snowstorm raged outside, Adelaide went into labor. Benjamin was terrified, his face pale despite all his usual calm competence. Adelaide had to talk him through what needed to be done, directing him to boil water, gather clean linens, help her through the contractions. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Benjamin held her hand, wiped her forehead, and whispered encouragement even when she screamed at him that this was all his fault. When their son finally arrived, healthy and howling, Benjamin wept openly. "He is perfect," he said, cradling the tiny bundle with surprising gentleness for such a large man. "You are amazing, Adelaide, absolutely amazing." They named him James after Benjamin's father. He had dark hair like his father and blue eyes that Benjamin insisted would eventually turn brown. Benjamin was a devoted father, often waking in the night to help with the baby, changing diapers and walking James when he was fussy so Adelaide could rest, watching her large, strong husband gently rocking their tiny son. Adelaide felt her heart overflow with love. This life she had built, this family, it was so much more than she had ever dreamed possible when she had been sitting in that cold boarding house room mending her torn clothes. Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter came 2 years after James, with Adelaide's blonde hair and Benjamin's brown eyes. They named her Mary. Then another son 3 years later, whom they named Thomas. The cabin grew more crowded but also more filled with love and laughter. Benjamin eventually built an addition to the cabin, adding 2 more rooms so the children could have their own space. He also began trapping less, focusing more on the homestead. He expanded the garden, acquired a milk cow, and built a larger chicken coop. They were nearly self-sufficient, only going to Reading once or twice a year for supplies and to sell furs. The children grew up strong and healthy, educated from the books in Benjamin's collection, and the practical knowledge both parents could provide. James showed an early aptitude for trapping and hunting like his father. Mary had her mother's skill with a needle and her father's way with animals. Thomas was quieter than his siblings, happiest when reading by the fire or exploring the woods around the cabin. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Adelaide by producing a small wrapped package at supper. "What is this?" she asked, taking the package. "Open it and see." Inside was a beautiful length of silk fabric in deep green, far finer than anything Adelaide had owned. She ran her hands over it, marveling at the softness. "Benjamin, this must have cost a fortune. You are worth it." He pulled her into his lap, heedless of the children giggling at the table. "You came into my life when I had given up on ever finding someone to share it with. You gave me a home, a family, more happiness than I knew existed. A bit of silk does not even begin to repay that debt." "You do not owe me anything," Adelaide protested. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. Then I suppose we are even." He kissed her softly. "Though I still think I got the better end of the bargain." "Papa is being mushy again," James announced to his siblings. "Mama likes it when Papa is mushy," Mary informed her brother with the authority of a 6-year-old. "One day, you will both understand," Benjamin told his children. "Love makes you do mushy things." That night, after the children were asleep in their room, Adelaide sat at her sewing table working on a shirt for Thomas, while Benjamin mended a harness by lamplight. The scene was remarkably similar to that night 10 years ago when Benjamin had first called on her, though everything else had changed. "You remember that first night we met?" Adelaide asked. "When you came to the boarding house?" Benjamin looked up with a smile. "I remember being terrified you would send me away. I had rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times, but when I saw you standing there looking so wary and proud, all my planned words flew out of my head. I thought you were going to be trouble. A strange mountain man buying me fabric and asking to call on me. I was trouble, the best kind of trouble." Adelaide laughed. "You were. You turned my whole life upside down. Any regrets?" She set down her sewing and went to him, settling herself on his lap as she had done countless times over the years. His arms came around her automatically, holding her close. "Not a single one. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, love, security, partnership. You saw me when I was barely surviving and offered me a chance at something more. You took that chance, though. You were brave enough to trust me, to marry a stranger and follow him into the mountains. I asked you to stay, but you were the one who chose to." "Best decision I ever made," Adelaide said firmly. They sat together in comfortable silence, the sounds of their children's soft breathing coming from the other room, the fire crackling in the hearth. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, and night settled over their valley. Adelaide thought back to that desperate woman she had been, mending torn clothes by candlelight, trying to make old fabric last just a little longer. She had been so focused on survival, on making it through one more day, that she had forgotten to hope for anything better. But then Benjamin Wade had walked into her life with his kind eyes and gentle strength, offering not just fabric but a future. He had seen something in her worth protecting, worth loving, and he had given her the chance to see it in herself. The fabric he had bought her was long since used up, turned into clothes that were now worn out themselves. But what he had really given her could never be depleted. He had given her hope, security, love, and a family. He had given her a life that was not just about surviving but about truly living. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too," he murmured into her hair. "Always." Years continued to pass in their mountain home. The children grew from babies to youngsters to young adults. James became a skilled trapper like his father, though he preferred to stay close to home rather than ranging as far as Benjamin once had. Mary shocked them all by announcing at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher, and Benjamin made the difficult journey to Reading to arrange for her to study with the schoolteacher there. Thomas surprised no one by declaring his intention to become a doctor. He had always been the one to care for injured animals and tend to his siblings' scrapes and bruises. Benjamin and Adelaide saved their money and eventually sent him to study in Denver, though it broke Adelaide's heart to have him so far away. But they all came back. James built his own cabin on the other side of the valley and married a girl from Redding, bringing her home to raise their own family near his parents. Mary taught school in Redding during the week and came home to the mountain on weekends. Thomas returned after his studies to serve as the traveling doctor for the scattered mountain communities, using his parents' cabin as his home base between his rounds. Adelaide and Benjamin grew older together, their hair turning gray, their steps becoming slower, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with each passing year. On their 25th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. The house was full of noise and laughter, of children running and adults telling stories. Adelaide looked around at the family they had created, and tears of joy slipped down her face. Benjamin noticed, as he always did. He crossed to her side and pulled her close. "Happy tears, I hope. Very happy." She gestured at the crowded cabin. "Look at what we built, Benjamin. Look at all these people who exist because you were brave enough to buy fabric for a struggling woman and ask her to stay." "We built this together," he corrected gently. "I asked, but you said yes. You trusted me with your life, and I have tried every day to be worthy of that trust." "You have been more than worthy." Adelaide stood on tiptoe to kiss him, ignoring the good-natured teasing from their adult children. "You are the best man I have ever known." That night, after everyone had left or settled down to sleep in various corners of the cabin and barn, Adelaide and Benjamin walked out to stand under the stars. The same stars that had shone on them that first night in Redding, when their future had been uncertain and their hearts had been guarded. "Do you remember how nervous I was to come to the mountains with you?" Adelaide asked. "I remember. You were terrified but trying not to show it. I was convinced I was making a terrible mistake, but I was more afraid of staying in Redding, slowly working myself to death in that saloon." She leaned against his solid strength. "You saved my life, Benjamin. We saved each other." He wrapped his arms around her. "I was dying up here alone, just too stubborn to admit it. You brought life and light back to me. You made me human again." They stood together under the vast mountain sky, surrounded by the family they had created, in the home they had built together. Adelaide thought about that woman she had once been, desperately mending torn clothes by candlelight, trying to stretch every resource, every moment, every hope. That woman could never have imagined this future, could never have dreamed that a mountain man would walk into her life and offer her not just fabric but forever, could never have believed that saying yes to a stranger's proposal would lead to the greatest love story of her life, but it had. Benjamin had seen her when she was invisible to everyone else. He had valued her when she had felt worthless. He had loved her when she could barely remember how to love herself. And she had taken that chance, had trusted him with her future, and had built something beautiful from that leap of faith. "No regrets?" Benjamin asked softly, as he had so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Adelaide answered, as she always did. "You asked me to stay, and I am so grateful I said yes. I am grateful every day that you walked into that saloon," Benjamin said. "That I happened to overhear you asking about fabric, that I was brave enough to come to the boarding house that night. Every coincidence, every moment that led me to you." "Maybe it was not coincidence," Adelaide suggested. "Maybe it was fate bringing two lonely people together. Maybe." He kissed the top of her head. "Whatever it was, I am thankful for it." They eventually went back inside, to the warm cabin filled with sleeping family members. They settled into their bed, the same bed they had shared for 25 years, and wrapped themselves in each other's arms. Adelaide's last thoughts before drifting to sleep were of gratitude. Gratitude for the fabric that had started everything, for the mountain man who had cared enough to notice her struggle, for the chance she had been brave enough to take. She had been mending torn clothes by candlelight, barely surviving. Benjamin had bought her fabric and asked her to stay. And in saying yes, she had found everything she had ever needed and so much more than she had ever dared to dream. Their love story, born from practical necessity and loneliness, had become something rare and precious. It had weathered storms and hardships, had grown and deepened with time, and had created a legacy that would continue for generations. As Adelaide Wade fell asleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by the family they had built together, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her home, not in a place but in a person, and that home had given her a lifetime of love. The candles had long since been replaced by lamplight, and then eventually by the warm glow of a loving family. The torn clothes had been mended and replaced countless times, but the love that had begun with such a simple gesture of kindness had never needed mending. It had been whole and true from the start, and it remained so now, after all these years. Benjamin had asked her to stay, and Adelaide had stayed. And in staying, she had found everything she had ever wanted and so much more. She had found love, security, family, and a happiness that started from the moment a mountain man had noticed her struggle and decided to do something about it. It was a simple story in many ways. A man buying fabric for a struggling woman, offering her a better life, asking her to take a chance on him. But simple did not mean insignificant. Sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest changes. Sometimes the bravest thing was saying yes to an uncertain future. Adelaide had said yes, and that yes had changed everything. As the years continued to roll past, Adelaide and Benjamin grew old together in their mountain home. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Their cabin had become the heart of a small community, with James's family on one side of the valley and other settlers who had been drawn to the area by the Wade family's reputation for kindness and hard work. Benjamin's hair and beard had gone completely white, and he moved more slowly now, but he was still strong, still protective of his Adelaide. She had aged too, her blonde hair silver, her hands marked by a lifetime of work. But she was still beautiful to him, and he told her so every single day. On a warm summer evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Adelaide took Benjamin's hand. "I want you to know something," she said softly. "What is that, my love? If I had to do it all over again, I would not change a single thing. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear and uncertainty, it was all worth it because it led me to you." Benjamin raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I feel the same. My life truly began the day I walked into that boarding house and saw you standing there. Everything before that was just waiting. We have had a good life, have we not? The best life." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, fitting against him as perfectly as she had for over 50 years. "And it is not over yet. We still have more sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to spoil, more years to love each other." Adelaide smiled, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. He was right. Their story was not over yet, but whenever it did end, she knew it would be complete. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. The fabric Benjamin had bought her all those years ago had become clothes, which had worn out and been replaced again and again. But the love he had offered her that same night had never worn thin. It had only grown stronger, richer, more precious with every passing year. She had been mending torn clothes by candlelight, barely surviving in a harsh world. He had been a lonely mountain man, aching for companionship. Together they had built a life that was full and rich and beautiful. He had bought her fabric and asked her to stay. She had said yes. And that yes had become forever. As the sun finally dipped below the mountain peaks, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Adelaide and Benjamin Wade sat together in the peaceful silence of a love that had lasted a lifetime. Around them, their valley settled into night, the home they had built standing strong, the family they had created continuing their legacy. It had all started with such a simple thing: torn clothes and fabric and a mountain man brave enough to care. But from that simple beginning had grown something extraordinary. A love that had weathered every storm, a family that stretched across generations, a home that was built not of logs and stone but of devotion and partnership. Adelaide closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that she had lived well, loved well, and been loved in return. The frightened young woman who had once sat alone in a boarding house, desperately trying to make her worn clothes last just a little longer, seemed like a different person now. That woman had survived, but this woman, Adelaide Wade, had truly lived, all because a mountain man had noticed her struggle and offered her something better. All because she had been brave enough to say yes to an uncertain future. All because two lonely people had found each other and built something beautiful together. The torn clothes had been mended long ago. The fabric had been used and replaced countless times. But the precious love that had started that cold night in Redding, Colorado in 1877, that had never needed mending. It had been perfect from the start, and it remained perfect still. Benjamin had asked her to stay, and Adelaide had stayed. And in staying, she had found everything her heart had ever needed: love, home, family, and a partner who had cherished her every single day of their lives together. It was, she thought as she drifted peacefully in her husband's arms under the starlight, the greatest love story ever told. Not because it was dramatic or filled with grand gestures, but because it was real. Because it had started from honesty and grown through partnership. Because two people had chosen each other, day after day, year after year, building something that would last forever. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, and in the cabin behind them, their family slept peacefully. Adelaide smiled, perfectly content, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together as they always had. She had been mending torn clothes by candlelight. He had bought her fabric and asked her to stay. She had said yes, and that yes had become everything.